In this video, I'm going to explain two other quadrilaterals, and those two particular quadrilaterals are going to be a rhombus, and a square. Okay, so first we start with the definition. Now, a rhombus, by definition, looks like this. We have four congruent sides. Boom, 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 kind of like a diamond almost. Okay, we don't need right angles, but all we need are four congruent sides. So the definition, we have four congruent sides. Okay, and so what that allows us to do is to establish lots of different properties. And so if that's my definition, then the properties which come from the definition include, first and foremost, a rhombus is a parallelogram. All right, and I could show or explain why it's a parallelogram if I created this diagonal, and then by the reflexive property, though, that's congruent to itself. And then the two triangles, the top here and the bottom here, would be congruent by side, 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 which makes, well, basically all four of these angles congruent. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and since all those angles are congruent, that allows us to show these lines are parallel by AIA. These two are congruent, which makes these parallel, and these two are congruent, which makes these lines parallel, which therefore makes that a parallelogram. So a rhombus is a parallelogram. So therefore it has all the properties of a parallelogram, okay, which include opposite sides congruent, well, obviously, opposite angles congruent, the diagonals bisect each other, and consecutive angles are supplements. Okay. In addition to that, we have one other neat thing that happens with the diagonals, really two things that happen with the diagonals. First of which is the diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, the diagonals themselves are not congruent. Okay, they do bisect each other because that's a property of a parallelogram, and a rhombus is a parallelogram. But the diagonals are perpendicular, and that's a property. Okay, and we can show that by showing two neighboring triangles are congruent. Okay, if these two triangles are congruent, and they are, then these two angles are congruent, and since they're supplements too, they have to be 90s. All right. So the diagonals are perpendicular, and another neat thing that happens in a rhombus regarding the diagonals is, as I already, went through here, I lost some of the, all of those yellow angles are congruent. So what the diagonals also do is the diagonals also bisect the angles from which they stem. Remember, bisecting an angle means you create two smaller congruent angles. Okay, so basically for a rhombus we have four congruent sides, right, by definition. Okay, so here is a definition, and only this, of a rhombus. Let me get those back for you. Four congruent sides, quadrilateral, four congruent sides. And by properties, we can show it's a parallelogram, which means that all the properties of a parallelogram are also upheld. Okay, we can show the diagonals are perpendicular, and diagonals are perpendicular looks like this. There are those perpendicular diagonals, and remember they bisect each other too by property of a parallelogram. And the diagonals also bisect the angles, which is the third property, which I'll try to squeeze in here, which means if that diagonal is going to create two angle bisectors. Now remember, those whole angles are congruent, so if we bisect both of them, each of those halves are congruent by the division property of equality. Okay, and the other diagonal is going to do the same to the other larger congruent angles. All right, so those are the properties and definition of a rhombus. A square, by definition, everybody knows what a square is, but a square is basically a rectangle and a rhombus. We're going to call it a rectangulus. Okay, it's a rectangle and a rhombus, which means it's a rectangle, right? So we have a parallelogram with right angle, really four, but at least one. And it's also a rhombus, so that means these sides have to all be congruent. So, can't go that far out. So this is what a square would be. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, everybody knows what a square is. We won't make that harder than it needs to be. But a square is both a rectangle and a rhombus. Okay, um, so we have all the properties, which I'll write in blue. Because it's a rectangle, all the rectangle properties, okay, which includes 490-degree angles, which includes the diagonals are congruent, okay. Um, Also, because it's actually a parallelogram too, we have all the parallelogram properties. Okay, diagonals bisect each other, for example. And we have all the rhombus properties because it's also a rhombus. So we have all these crazy properties that converge to give us a square. So here are the diagonals, which are congruent and perpendicular, and they bisect each other. So we have a series basically of, if this angle is 90 here, then each of these angles has to be 45, because those are 4 congruent triangles. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and they're also isosceles right angles, triangles, so we have 45, 45, 90s. Okay, so all the properties that we could possibly imagine occur within a square. Okay, everything nice as far as the angles. Everything gets bisected nicely by the diagonals, those being the original 90-degree angles to give us 45s. The diagonals bisect each other, they're congruent, they're also perpendicular to each other, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that said, those are rhombus, 4 congruent sides, definition, and square, a rectangular rhombus. Okay. Here's an interesting problem which I'll ask you to think about. We'll talk about this one in class tomorrow. So I'm going to set up a general square, okay? And the lengths of the sides are going to be A. And if that's the case, then this brings me to the point A0. This has to be point AA. This is the point 0A. A lot of A's. Okay. So my question to you is, if I take all the midpoints, so those are all the midpoints, and if I connect them, what quadrilateral is this? Is it a parallelogram? Is it a rectangle? Is it a rhombus? Or is it a square? And that's what we're going to start talking about in class tomorrow. Okay, so square, it's a rectangle and rhombus. It has all the properties in the world you could possibly imagine. A rhombus is kind of like a diamond. You have 4 congruent sides. Okay, and its consequent properties as well, including parallelogram properties and a couple others involving the diagonals. Okay, and this is the question we will begin class with tomorrow. Okay, so if we take the midpoint of each side of a square, connect it, what kind of quadrilateral is that red thing, and how do you know? Okay, think about that. We'll start with that in class tomorrow. Bye-bye.